Now, for more on this, I'm delighted to be joined here in the studio by former Prime Minister Tony Abbott. Tony, great to see you. How are you?
Morning, Rowan.
Tragic news. You were very close to Shinzo Abe. You've heard the ambassador's thoughts there. Tell us a little bit about your relationship with Shinzo Abe and the critical role he played as a Conservative leader.
Shinzo Abe was not just Japan's longest-serving Prime Minister, but he was the best friend of Australia that Japan has ever produced. Interesting, following on from Ambassador Yamagami-san, Shinzo Abe was the supreme strategist, if you like. He appreciated that the dominating fact in the world is the rise and the increasing assertiveness of China. And rather than simply lament this, because many Japanese politicians have long been apprehensive of China, rather than simply lament the deteriorating strategic circumstances, he did something about it. The Quad is essentially an Abe legacy. The Quad is probably the most important geo-strategic development since the formation of NATO. Yep. It would never have happened but for Shinzo Abe's persistence over a long period of time. Obviously, Japan and the United States have a long-standing alliance. Australia and the United States have a long-standing alliance. Australia and Japan are developing a much deeper strategic and military partnership. But only Shinzo Abe could have brought India into the Quad and kept them there. So he really does leave a magnificent legacy which will last a very long time for the wider world.
Rita.
I want to ask you about what sort of a politician he was and how rare it is in this day and age. We've just seen what's happened with Boris Johnson. We had here a genuine conviction politician, as someone with a backbone who was not going to take the easy road. And I'm just interested in your thoughts on how that compares to some other leaders we've seen around the world and what your thoughts are on what's happening in the UK.
Well, thank you, Rita. Look, the challenge for all politicians is to focus on the important and not to be distracted by the urgent. Now, politics, as we know, is just one damned thing after another, and you've got to deal with all of those damned things, but you can never let yourself be entirely distracted from your longer-term goals. And the great thing about Shinzo Abe is that he was always focused on the fundamental challenge of making your country stronger and making your country more secure. And again, I get back to the Quad, which was his greatest legacy, but also in terms of Japan and Australia, obviously he wanted to deepen the economic partnership, and the free trade deal that he and I finalised is an important part of that legacy. But I think for Abe-san, at least as important as the economic relationship was the strategic partnership, given what he could very realistically see was the way the world was going. Now, as late as 2014, most of us were still looking at China through rose-coloured glasses. He never did. And obviously, he had the deeper understanding of communist China than the rest of us did. And thank God that he was able to do what he did, because we're now in a much better position, admittedly late in the day, but a much better position vis-a-vis China than we were just a few years ago.
James.
Tony, I want to ask you, I have seen some shocking reactions out of China and on Chinese social media to Mr. Abe's assassination, and they are really celebrating. A lot of Chinese nationalists are this horrible crime. Are you concerned that his death will embolden nationalists within the Chinese, I guess, political infrastructure? And does this event contribute to an increasing likelihood that China may actually attempt to take Taiwan sometime, within the next 5 or 10 years?
James, look, it's always disappointing to see the crassness of social media, and I suppose it's not altogether surprising that some of Japan's critics associated with the Chinese Communist government should be engaging in a really crass and horrible pile-on. And I suppose the Chinese Communists appreciated that Shinzo Abe was one of their more staunch, consistent and effective opponents. I think that we do need to be very conscious of just how fraught the situation across the Taiwan Straits is. I think that Yamagami-san's observations just a few moments ago on this show were very apt. We cannot let what has happened to the Ukraine happen to Taiwan. And obviously, having seen what's happened to the Ukraine, it's critical that the democracies make it clear to China that any move on Taiwan would have absolutely massive consequences. The democracies need to raise the price to China of any move on Taiwan.
Tony Abbott, you would never have sold Australia out on net zero. You'd have never gone to Glasgow and sold us down the river to the climate change extremists. Yet Scott Morrison, Boris Johnson, Naftali Bennett all did, all supposedly centre-right politicians, all went up to Glasgow, all are now gone within 8 months, coincidence or otherwise. What do you make of the departure of Boris Johnson? You were close to him. Tell us about your thoughts about the resignation of Boris Johnson.
Almost no leader is perfect, Rowan, as you know. And yes, there were some things that Boris Johnson did that I wouldn't have necessarily done or particularly applauded. Nevertheless, Boris Johnson has been a transformative leader. I don't believe Brexit would ever have happened but for Boris Johnson. A lot of the animus against Boris Johnson, let's be clear, was Remainer bile. Absolutely. It was Remainer bile. That's not to say that he didn't make mistakes and didn't have flaws, but it's critically important that there be no backsliding on Brexit, and it's critically important that whoever now emerges as the Conservative leader finalises the last details of Brexit and then gets on with the job of leading global Britain. One of Boris Johnson's other great achievements, he really has led the West response in terms of Ukraine. Britain has been training the Ukrainian army ever since 2014. Britain was really the first major Western country to give offensive weaponry to the Ukrainians, and I am certain that it was Boris Johnson that put steel in the spine of Joe Biden in those critical early hours after Putin's invasion.
Right. James.
Tony, just quickly, this assassination, of course, shocked the world, but as a former Prime Minister yourself, does it give you any pause? Does it make you worry at all about yourself or the safety of politicians here in Australia, which has a famously open kind of security arrangement versus, say, in the United States? Do you think that, does this give you any pause as a former Prime Minister yourself and, for politicians who are just out there on hustings?
Look, James, not really. Obviously, this is an absolute atrocity. It's an evil act which has befallen Shinzo Abe, but it does seem to have been an aberration. And certainly, I don't think democratic politicians should live in a cocoon, and I'm certainly not going to start living in a cocoon myself.
Tony Abbott, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders. Terrific to have you here in the studio with us and to get your thoughts and reminiscence about Shinzo Abe and your insights on Boris Johnson. Thanks so much, Tony Abbott. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.